the uses of ReportWriter as part of our Service Point software. I'm here with you from All Chicago, and this is Amanda Fox, and I also have with me David, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Morning, everybody. David Melnick.
So we are recording this webinar, so for anyone that's not able to join you from your agency, or if you want to watch this later, we have hit that button, so we are recording. We will be able to take questions as they come up, but we do have you on mute for now. So if you would like to ask questions while we are going through the presentation, we absolutely encourage you to do that. A lot of how we're going to walk through this is based off the requests that you made when you registered for this webinar. That's going to be the primary focus of what we show you in terms of the examples of reports that we're going to build. We will also give you a chance to build a report yourself during this webinar, and then draw some questions that you might like to ask after trying that. So keep in mind that you might want to have Service Point handy somewhere on your computer, because we are going to give you a brief couple of minutes at some point during this webinar to ask you to try to build your own report and then come back to us to let us know what your questions would be. We'll make it real simple, but we want to give you something a little interactive today. So just in terms of some additional logistics, if you're having any trouble hearing us, please do let us know. There is the chat function and the question function. We're going to primarily focus on the questions that come in, but if we notice anyone's using the chat feature, we will also try to respond to those as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward here to jump right in and show you the options for reporting that we have in Service Point. And just make sure I have my screen set up right here. There we go. So we wanted to briefly review the reporting tools that you have available in Service Point. And so this is sort of the four primary tools we have, and a brief explanation of them. And they, starting at the top, they go from the most predefined types of reports, and then you work your way down to the bottom where you have the more customizable reports, or ones that we've customized depending on what you're looking at here. And I'll briefly explain. At the top of the list is the counts reports. If you don't have counts reports set up on your dashboard, it's something I would encourage you to explore. I find them to be extremely useful for very quick information, and just as it describes, a counts report is providing a count of whatever you set the report up to be counting. But they are very much preset reports, meaning that you cannot alter the way that they're designed and what data they're pulling in. So we do have some guides on our help desk that we can certainly direct you to if you have not used those reports, but I truly do encourage you to explore them if you haven't. The next layer is the canned reports. We call them canned reports because our software vendor has sort of provided them with the software when it's purchased. So those, again, are ones that we do not customize, nor can you customize them. But they are reports that I would encourage you to at least be aware of, because there are certain cases where they could be very useful. And there's a couple of them that some programs actually have to use, but the canned reports will point them out when we go into the system. ReportWriter is the focus of our conversation today, and you see that that falls third in this list, and it falls there because it is a tool that allows you to build your own reports and customize them. But it's also a tool that's very limited in terms of the complexity of the reporting that you can produce from that tool. So that implies that you would do a lot of your analysis outside of the system. And so a lot of what we'll emphasize today is the purpose behind using ReportWriter and the things that it's really good at, and then kind of draw that connection to where you're going to have to move the data out of the system, the raw data, and do your analysis in a tool like Excel or whatever other tool you might be comfortable with. Most of you would probably use Excel. That's the format that the data would be downloaded in, and we'll show you those steps as well of how to get to your raw data. The most complex reports come from ART. ART is our advanced reporting tool. That's a part of the system that you need an additional license to use, and that's why mostly your ATAs, or Agency Technical Administrators, would be the users that have access to that system. So again, the advanced reporting tool is the most complex report, and those are ones that our team supports, and David is very familiar with ART. If you have questions about that tool, we're always happy to answer them through the help desk. So just to go a little bit more into detail on ReportWriter, here's some tips for you. One thing that we always want to encourage you to do is pull in clients' ID numbers. Client IDs are the fastest way you will find your clients in Service Point, and that's one of the best ways to make sure that you are going back to the exact right client record. So we always encourage you to pull in client ID. The other thing we would encourage you to do is make sure that you are working with your filter groups in a smart way. And I say in a smart way because you don't want to mix your and or operators. And for those of you that are brand new to ReportWriter, you'll start to learn what we're talking about with operators and the ands and the ors. But this is basically when you're filtering, do you want to include something that is true about two different filters that you set up, and it must be true for all the data that pulls into the system, or are you going to ask the system to pull in both either or of two different cases of something that might be true about your client's data that you're trying to access. So ands and ors are very powerful, but you want to separate them in different reporting groups. In general, or filter groups, excuse me. The filter groups are definitely something that we encourage you to use more of them rather than less of them, because they're also helpful for helping you separate out the different levels of the filters that you are putting into the report itself. And that's just for clarity for the user so that you can see exactly what you set it up to do, and then you can troubleshoot easier as well. One of the things that we'll highlight throughout this webinar is that we are here to support you in your building of these reports. And what you can always do is save your reports and send us a message in the help desk to say that you're trying to accomplish something and you haven't yet succeeded, and that you'd like our support in potentially tweaking that report. And if you are going to ask for our assistance with ReportWriter, we need you to create and save a report that we can go back to and help you sort of recalibrate your filters or the fields that you pull in. So that's the way that we'll work with you on this. But as always, if you don't succeed at first, we encourage you to continue to try. That's why we offer support, but in general, that's the way that I've learned ReportWriter, just in my years of a user in Service Point. That is really how I learned ReportWriter, was truly just playing with the tool itself. Spot checking your reports is also extremely important, because at first, if you're not comfortable with the tool, you might not want to assume that your results are accurate until you've spot checked them. So this is everything that we wanted to throw out there in terms of tips and advice that we would give you, but now we're going to jump right into ReportWriter. So I'm going to get out of this PowerPoint and go right over to the database. So I have ReportWriter open on my screen, but I'm going to go back to the home screen to show you how to get to this report. So from my home screen, first I'll point out that this is accounts report over on the right side of my dashboard. If you don't have accounts report set up on your dashboard, there is an area down here to customize your homepage dashboard, and you can get to actually accounts report. You can click on a button to set one up, but we won't touch on that much more than that unless you have questions. I'm going to go straight over here into the reports menu option. Once I've clicked on reports, and you're looking at the system slightly differently than what you'll see in the system is slightly different than what I'm seeing, but most of you will see these provider reports. This is truly where I was talking about canned reports. So all of these different options are considered canned reports in our system, meaning that our software vendor builds them, supports them, and there are some of you that have to use things like this CAPER report, and some of you I know like this entry-exit report. But a lot of you asked for us to show some examples around reports that pull in service transaction data or shelter stay data. And we did want to draw your attention to the needs report, the client served report, as well as the service transaction report. Those are ones just to be aware of because they do pull in service transaction data. So just a heads up, you might want to explore those. And if you have questions about them, you can always email the help desk. Now down to the custom reports area. ATAs will see that they have a link to ART here. That's the advanced reporting tool. If you don't have that link, that means you don't have a license to ART. But ReportWriter is something that everyone will have access to. One nice clarification about the difference between these two tools is that ReportWriter is always going to be real-time data. So for anyone that's looking for real-time information that struggles with the way that ART functions, You can always use ReportWriter if you choose to, but anyone that is using ART should be aware that when you are pulling data from that system, it will always be about data that was true as of yesterday, is really kind of how we think of it. There's a warehouse that builds that occurs every night, and that's the point at which all the data comes over to ART from the current day. So whatever's put in the system today will not be available in ART until around 3 o'clock in the morning. So that's one difference. And we're going to go into ReportWriter now, because this is what we're going to be focusing on for the rest of the webinar. So notice on my screen that there are a lot of specific reports that you might be seeing here from different agencies. The way that the system functions, you all will see reports that you have built, and you will see reports that we have built at All Chicago. So all of you will see something like this report right here. And right now I'm in the # option for this menu. This top of the screen here is a menu. So based on the first letter in the name of the report, or number in the case of this #, that's where you would find the reports once you've created them. So again, you all will be able to see reports that we have built at All Chicago, and you will be able to see the reports that you have built, but you will not see other agencies' reports. So when you come into this ReportWriter, you either are going to navigate to a saved report using one of the letters at the top of the screen to navigate to that particular report. There is a button over here for all reports as well, if you chose to look at it that way. I haven't really explored that one much, but I'm sure that's very handy. And at the very bottom of the screen is where you would start a new report down here. So I'm going to go ahead and start off by looking at a brand new report. And again, let us know as any questions come up, because I don't think we had questions about this part of the system. A lot of you were, in general, wanting an overview of how it works. But if you do have particular questions, let us know. So what you're looking at here are the different tabs in ReportWriter that you would use to build and then customize this report. You start off with the tab that we're currently in, which is Tables, and then we have Filters, or Fields, Filters, Counting, Preview, and Options. So the way that ReportWriter works, we will build this report, and we can choose to save it. The saving will be done at the very end, the last step. But you'd kind of work through it tab by tab here. And I'm going to first talk about the structure of this, and then we'll show you an example of one of the first reports that, one of the easiest reports that some of you asked us to demonstrate. So as just to look through the tables, this is perhaps one of the most overwhelming of the tabs, because you do, as I scroll down, you do see tables and then assessments, and then as you keep going down, you can see the sub-assessments, as well as, at the very bottom, worksheets. I don't think any of you will need to go as far as worksheets necessarily, but a lot of you would be interested based on some of your requests. You might be interested in sub-assessments. Definitely some of you will need to be looking at the assessments here, and then all of you will need to pull in the tables. This is the beginning, so we'll talk about the tables for a minute here, and I'll point out to you the ones that I find particularly helpful. Because one of the things that I truly learned through practice was which tables and various assessments and sub-assessments really have in them the data that I'm trying to pull into my reports. So you have to be thoughtful at this step. And what's nice is you can come back and change the tables or assessments that you're pulling in, but knowing how to work with this tool will definitely be giving you a good start. So one of the first things that I like to pull in on this left column, I always start with pulling in clients. And I pull in clients because I want to be able to pull in the client's name. So I find that that is the only table that will allow me to pull in the name of my actual client. So that's information that you want to see, you have to pull in this particular table. To pull it in, I would check off the box. Then I tend to pull in entry-exit. This is where all of your entry-exit information is going to live. So this includes the provider that's attached to the client for the enrollment, as well as the entry dates, the exit dates. And so that's the primary reasons I check off this one, because I want access to that information. So now I would be able to pull in my client's names and their entries into particular programs, as well as the start and the end dates of those entries by having these checked off. As I keep kind of looking around here, sorry, I keep scrolling faster than I mean to. This middle column, You might find that you're interested in looking at household data, but we're not going to look at that today. That's definitely the information that's here, which is why I pointed out. But we're going to focus on the relationship to head of household question in order to look at anything about connections of different clients as being connected, whether it be in enrollments or whatever the question is that you might be trying to answer with the report you're building. You could choose to use households to get out who's the head of the household or who are the children. But at this point, we've evolved in Service Point to where we also now have a question in the HUD and all of the assessments, actually, that anyone would use. The very first question you see is the relationship to head of household. So I'm going to pull in one of the assessments instead of pulling in the household data. As I keep kind of looking through this list, there's nothing else here that I want to point out to you in particular. But in this third column, notice as I keep kind of coming down this list, going in order, that there are service tables as well. So these 4 different tables for services might be ones that some of you want to explore in order to determine which ones you might want to utilize to pull in data for the reports you were looking to build around services. And we will touch on one of those. But I'm going to move down to the assessment. And the assessment that I want to look for is the one that my program is using. So wherever the data is going into the client point for the client, when you're putting the client's data into their record, that's the one that I want to check off here. And you will find all of them listed here. So you should be seeing all of the assessments that you use. And I'm going to check off this HUD, COC, and ESG entry 2015 report. That's the one that we're going to pull data in from. In terms of other assessments that you might want to use, that's something you can certainly ask questions about if you have them. But that's the only one I'm going to check off for the moment. These sub-assessments is something I'm not going to check off yet, but we are going to look at these in just a few minutes here. And notice that all of the parts of the assessment that would have sub-assessments should have something represented here. So if we're looking for health insurance, got it right there. There's your health insurance sub-assessment. So that's where your data would be that you're putting into the client's that HUD, COC, and ESG entry assessment, or whichever assessment you're using. If you're answering the health insurance questions and completing the sub-assessment with the HUD verifications, that data is going to be in this sub-assessment area here. And so on and so forth with all of these sub-assessments. I won't go into them in too much more detail than that, but we were asked to look at some things around income. So if you are looking to pull income data out of this system, you will need to look for sub-assessments if you want to be able to pull in the sources of that income or the amounts. The information that you will find in the traditional HUD assessment here is going to be just the yes-no questions that live outside of the sub-assessments. So just to kind of continue this tour that we're taking of how ReportWriter is set up, I'm only going to have those 2 tables checked off that I mentioned for clients and entry-exit, and then the assessments being the HUD, COC, and ESG entry. So now that I'm ready to move to the next tab, I'll click on Fields. So from Fields, what I'm looking at are all the tables and the assessments that I selected in the last screen. So I now have access to these specific data elements in the client table, and I could choose to check off any of the boxes here for the data elements I want to pull into my results in the report. The timing of what I check off first is how my report results are going to be built in terms of the rows, the order of the rows that I'll get, but we'll show you how to manipulate the results before you decide to save the report. So I'm going to click on first name and last name and client ID from this table. And that's really everything I wanted this table for, but notice that this is the table where I would need to check off Social Security number if I wanted that, as well as military status. So just notice what's in this table. The client's table is really pulling from information that was entered into the client's record when you created the record. So record creation data lives in the client's table. Entry exit, notice it also has a client ID field. So if you didn't want the first and last name for your client or the Social Security number or veteran status, you didn't have to pull this particular table in. So if I have client ID here and I have it over here, I should be confident that those are the exact same fields. And if I chose to pull in client ID in this one, I would see that I had 2 columns for the exact same information, and it should be duplicate information at that point. So the idea here is you don't need to check off the same field twice. You can certainly do that, and then you can take it away by manipulating the results, and I'll show you how that works. I'll actually check it off and then show you how to take it away real quick here. I also want to pull in my entry date. I told you that was what lives in this table, and there it is. And I don't need to pull in anything with these entry-exit IDs. These are numbers. These are only numbers associated on the back end of the system with that date. So I'm only going to pull in entry date. As I keep coming down, you can see the other pieces of information you might like to check off. But I'm going to also check off exit date. And the last thing that I'm going to check off is provider. Provider at this point is going to be the provider that the client is enrolled under, considering I'm in the entry-exit table here. But notice you also have provider creating, provider updating. Those are considered more audit fields, and you wouldn't use those to determine which program at your agency the client is enrolled in. Those would simply be showing you who created the entry and which provider created it and which provider updated it. So those could be giving you misleading results. You would want to choose provider at this point if you want to see where they're enrolled. And that's really everything that I'm interested in pulling from this table. So I have the program they're enrolled in along with their exit date and their entry date. And I checked off client ID a second time just to show you what's going to happen when I check it off twice and then how to take it away. The HUD, COC, and ESG entry assessment, if there's something in here that I need to pull in, I would look for it in alphabetical order. Despite the relationship to head of household being the question at the very top of the assessment, it's going to live under its alphabetical ordering in this table or assessment list. So I could pull in date of birth if I wanted that information. And as I scroll down, I can look for relationship to head of household if I'd also like to pull that in. And to show you what you get here. So the next thing that I would do is click on filters. Filters is just a lot of what we'll talk about as we keep going here, and a lot of what some of you that are active in the system will want to ask questions about or have asked questions about. And it looks like we have a question, so I'm going to pause for a second here and see what questions we're asking. So we have a question about what entry-exit type means. Entry-exit type, and let me show you what that looked like back in the field. So that's in the entry-exit table here, and the type right here is relating to whether you choose HUD, if you choose PATH, if you choose RI, or if you choose VA for the type of the entry-exit that you would be creating. So that is specific to when you're creating entries, what type of entry is it? And the entries drive what, or the types drive what assessments you see. So let me know if you have a follow-up question about that one. The follow-up question was just a clarification of what that, what the user might have interpreted that to mean, but unfortunately that is very literal. It is just the information that you would select for the type. And I think that was the only questions that you had. Don't get confused when you look in here about where you see entry/exit. What you'll see as we keep moving forward is that that language is really specifying which table the information is coming from. So you're going to see that entry-exit language throughout ReportWriter, and it's really more of a classification of that data element and where it lives in the back end of the system. So you're really getting a small kind of window here that you're seeing into the design of our database, the guts, if you will, because you can see a little bit of the table structure in the back end of this database and then how those are connected. So that entry/exit is going to remain there, but it only relates to sort of the table that it's coming from. Okay. And that was the only questions I see for now, so we're going to keep moving forward. And for filters, we want to emphasize one thing first, is these active filters that are already pulled in, you don't want to adjust those. And the best practice here would really be to leave those alone and start your own filter group for the information that you want to filter on. That's going to be the best practice, and that's what I'll suggest and do myself, just to give you a really clear picture of what filters were set up by ReportWriter initially, and then which ones you would want to create yourself. So the active, what that's referring to is that I've checked off those two tables, and the system is telling us that it's only going to pull in those fields that are active, meaning they have not been deleted. So the other thing you don't want to do is remove these. So to remove any filters, you would use this red circle with the minus sign, and I'm suggesting that you would never want to do that with these active filters. They'll always be there based on which tables you selected, so you don't need to adjust them at all. But I would start a new filter group, and I'll show you briefly how this works. If I want to begin with a filter, I would add a filter. A little window pops open, and the first thing I'll see is the particular tables and assessments or sub-assessments that I selected off that I wanted to pull in and have available in this report. So that's the first thing I see. And then I'll choose just, I will choose entry exit as the one provider that I will set up on this report. And I'll set it up just so that there's one program's data coming in so you can see how this works. And then we'll just go all the way to the last tab, and then we'll start working on some of the reports that you asked us to show you how to build. So now that I've selected the entry exit table, now I would want to choose one of the fields or questions. So it's set to active right now just because that's the top of the list. But notice that I can see and hear every single field that was available from the last tab, which was fields. So this isn't about which data I'm pulling in to my report, because I've already determined that. This is actually what do I want to set filters on from the possible data elements or questions. So I can have fields pulled in that are different from the fields that I use to set up filters, meaning that if I wanted to set a filter on provider, I didn't have to have it checked off in the fields tab. Just a note for some of you that might be interested in knowing that clarification. But I'm going to click on provider, and notice that I've changed my screen a little bit. A lot of you will not have to use this search function. My recollection is that you will actually see the same drop-down list that you have in the rest of the system to choose provider at this point. But what you do want to make sure that you pay attention to is this. What we're saying here, or being asked, is from the entry-exit table, based on the question of provider, do you want to set your filter to equal whatever you're about to select for the provider? Do you want it to not equal that? Or these would not be very good to use in this case, but the other options here are that the provider field is null or that it is not null. So that's just starting to understand the filter options. Go with what makes sense. What makes sense in this case is equal. And I'm going to do a search, but again, you would probably have a drop-down list to show you just the providers that you have access to. We are going to pull in fake data today so that we don't have any concerns about confidentiality. But now that I have my filter set, the only thing to do now is save. So now I have a filter set up, and it is saying that it's going to pull in only those clients that have an entry connected to this particular provider. If I wanted to remove this, I would click the red circle with the minus sign, or I would click on the pencil to edit it if for some reason I chose the wrong provider, or if I wanted to change the provider. Now, just to keep it simple, I'm going to go over to counting to show you what this looks like. The counting tab is really going to just be counting the numbers of clients that fit the criteria that you set up in the filters. And I might have made this a very large report. Actually, it's not too bad. So it's showing me right now that for the provider that I selected, I have 58 clients that are not null in this case, with a total of 58 clients that have data appearing. And it's also giving me a small count here of the relationships to head of household that I've pulled in. I don't find this tab to usually provide me a lot of information that I really use. I usually look at this tab to confirm that results are pulling in. And where I really want to go for the results is preview. So this is just a stop on your way to actually getting to the raw data. So now if I click on preview, what I'm going to see is the system processing, and I can see at the top of the screen all of the fields that I checked off in order to pull into this report, and I should see only clients that have a provider listed as the one that I selected of All Chicago Emergency Shelter. So this window works very similarly to some of the other parts of the system which you might be noticing. I do have this first, previous, next, last buttons that I can navigate with to see all of the results in this window. But the alternative is that I would download this report in full. And to download, I click on that, get another little window that tells me I can download. Once I click on it, whatever internet browser you're using will give you this option to open the report itself. Once I click on it and open the Excel file, I would see that data in Excel and could now manipulate it. So that's the sort of the intention that we were referring to earlier, that a lot of report writers use is going to be getting your data out of the system in this form, in whatever format you choose, so that you can do some further analysis. And I'm going to go back to the database so we can keep going on our tour here, because there's one more tab to talk about. But I'm also going to answer your question for whatever questions in here now. And for Chandra, you're asking if we can demonstrate filters for entry and exits for specific years, and for sure, we will definitely be doing that. We actually have a few specific examples from things that you all requested that we're going to show next. And for Amanda, whether you can add multiple providers, I would say you want to test it and try it out, because you should be able to in some ways, depending on how you're setting up the report. But David, do you have any additional thoughts on that?
You can use multiple providers. It's just not within that same, it's not in a great format. So you can't use like that same filter. You can't click on the filter and then just pick all the providers that you want. You have to create kind of a separate filter for each one, where you say it could be this provider, or it could be this provider, or it could be this provider, or it could be this provider. So there's some reports you can run in ART where you just select them all at once and then bring them over. You can't do that with ReportWriter, which is a little frustrating, but there is another option for that.
Sure, and I do like that idea. You would just have one reporting group with all the potential providers that you would be interested in looking at client data from, and it would just be this one or, and so on for however many you have. That would, I can see that in my mind. It sounds great, and it looks good there too. Yeah, the or option, exactly, Amanda. So we will show you some of those examples very soon here. So from the preview tab, what I found in my use of this tool quite often was that I would get to this point, I would look at my results, and then I would go back and I would make adjustments. Like for instance, if I wanted to know what a particular field looked like, what data was it pulling in, because maybe it has a slightly different name in ReportWriter than what I see in Service Point or in Client Point. That's going to be something that you will deal with here and there. I just noticed with services that to see the name of the service, there's no field that says that in the table that I looked at. I had to play around with them, and this is the tab I would come to see what is it pulling out. So for instance, if I had done that with like this client ID field and realized, oh hey, there's a complete duplicate field. It's the exact same information. I don't want that in my results. I would actually just skip from preview all the way back to fields. And I could just go in and say, I don't need this one, and I just like the one that's sitting at the front of the report. Now if I come back to preview, you should already see that that client ID column, the second one, is gone. So that's the beauty of ReportWriter, is in the midst of creating a report, I can make these adjustments, and in real time I can see the change. Again, this is pulling on real-time data, so that's another benefit of ReportWriter. I'm going to go to the Options tab as well to give you an overview of how this works. Notice that the first thing is it's requiring me to name this report. So I'm going to just call it just test for me. And I could give it a description if I chose. And then at that point, I could save the report and exit. Or I could use this sorting function or this column order and title function. if perhaps I didn't like that provider was listed and with that term, this is a point where I could rename that field and say program. And then if I click rename, I now have that field listed as program. Relationship to head of household or date of birth, if I wanted to adjust anything else, I could do so as well. But as soon as I make that change, I don't know for sure. I've never really looked if it changes it. It does. So immediately it changes it over here as well, that now I can see that it's called program. But something I do want to show you is, and of course I could move up or down if I wanted last name on top of first name. I could also move those around just as a demo there. But now I'm going to save and exit, because what I want to show you is when I go back to that report, where did it go? Let's see. I thought it would have been right here. I'm going to click to an A and then go back and see if it's there. Really what I want to show you here is, where do you think my report went? There it is. Okay, so that all option was very helpful just now. But what I wanted to show you here is that I could delete this if I chose to. That would be my delete button. But this magnifying glass will let me go back into that report. Once I go back into it, it's always going to start on this preview tab to show me my results. But I can click back to tables if I want to make an adjustment, fields, or filters. I could change the filter for the program I want to work on. But if I come back to options, I don't have a resave button. So what this is telling you is that you will have to create a new version of this report and then delete the original one if you want to update it or show a change. If I did it again, and maybe this time I save number 2. And then if I do save report and exit, that will show up here. And I think now it's down there. So I could either choose to delete the first one if I had wanted only this version or just the second version, or I could keep them both and just keep changing the names. But I could also choose to just create a report and not save it if I didn't need to refer back to it later, or if I wanted to just answer a simple question and download the results. So saving is optional, but once you've saved, you can't edit. You have to, and save those changes, you have to just recreate. I can go back in and edit this one and just download the results. So it can always be a template. And I think templates are a very smart thing to do with ReportWriter. And I would, at some point, I can show a few of the templates that some of the agencies have set up, like for their users to pull out their particular service data or service transactions, which I think is one of the smartest things I've seen an agency do with this tool, is give their users who don't have access to ART a simple report template that they can use to pull results maybe for their monthly reporting. So that's just one kind of the overview and some details for you to think about. But we want to go into the demos, the exact reports that you asked us to build. So let's see what our first demo was going to be. So the very first one we were going to look at was a question around how to pull in a particular program's data in a particular time frame. That includes the client's age, their gender, and that's about it. And there's an additional question on this one of also whether we can include the length of time that someone who has exited stayed in the program. And what you're going to quickly see here is that we cannot do calculations in ReportWriter. We cannot calculate how long someone stayed, but what we can get is their entry date and their exit date, and then we can use Excel to calculate what the time is between those dates. So if I start a new report, and from my Tables tab, I'm going to want to pull in clients, although they didn't ask for name, did they? So we're not going to pull in name this time. We're just going to do entry exit and the HUD, COC, and ESG entry assessment if we want to get age, because remember, date of birth comes from the assessment. So with just those two tables selected, I can come to fields. And from here, I can check off client ID because that's the only way at this point I'm going to know whose data is whose. Entry date, Scrolling down here, I want exit date. And actually, that's it from this one. And as I scroll through the HUD, COC, and ESG entry, I want date of birth, and I want gender. And so if that's all we're looking for, and one of the beauties of report writers, you can be as specific as you want. And now to filters. So I think I'm going to ask David to speak a little bit here about that time frame stuff. When you're looking to look at a particular time frame, just to give some advice on how to think about that. But before we do that, I'm going to add a new filter group, and I'm going to add a filter. And I want this to be set on the entry-exit table. And I want to, again, look at provider. And I am going to do my search where you would have a drop-down. 883 is the number for the program we're going to look at here for fake data. I pull that in, and I save this filter. And then I would want to most likely create, just to keep things very clean, and at the beginning of using this tool, this might be something that's very helpful. You can add as many filter groups as you choose to. And at this point, we would want to add a filter. But this time, we would want to choose, actually still entry exits, but more so entry date. And now notice that there's a change that's happened here. I have a date field, and I have different operators or potential filters more so. And I'm going to let David talk for a minute about these filters before we demonstrate how to use some of these time-specific filters.
So, thanks, Amanda. The entry date and exit date filters are generally pretty tricky to work with. And they're tricky because they don't, when we say, hey, we want clients who entered or who were in my projects in the past year, we can think that, but it's really hard to write that down and conceptualize that in terms of when did they enter the program, when did they exit the program, or did they exit the program at all. So these are pretty tricky to work with, and the important thing is that there isn't really a hard and fast way to do this stuff. This is something where you have to think really hard about when the entry could have been and when the exit could have been. And as Amanda said at the very beginning of this webinar, it's really important to spot check, because you're going to put these filters in, and then maybe it's not doing exactly what you thought it was going to do. And you can see that really quickly if you check out your preview and see, oh wait, there's maybe an entry date from 3 years ago and I didn't want that. Or there's somebody who exited 3 years ago and I definitely don't want that. So if you spot check, it's usually pretty, I don't want to say easy, but you can see pretty quickly generally if there's something that's way out of whack with the way you set your filters.
Cool. So let's think about the filters we're going to use if we want to look at the June 2015 to the end of May of 2016. So if I want to look at, and this is, I'm kind of thinking of APRs here, where you would want to look at those who maybe entered and were in the program during that time frame, but also anyone that entered before then and stayed enrolled during that time frame. So you have to account for those possibilities as David was describing. And one of the things that I'm going to show is that if you do, for entry date, actually, it's going to be the opposite. So entry date, what would I want to do here? If I want to look at June 2015 as the possible beginning of the entry date, it would be that they entered on or after the first day that right? Would you do that one?
So, and actually, this
or on or before.
Yeah, so this is, these date parameters are really tricky because we think about these things differently in our head. You know, when I think about people who are enrolled in a program, I think about, or at least during this time period, I think about the people who entered before and the people who entered during. But we actually don't even need to think about that in terms of the computer. We just want to make sure that they entered before. We want to make sure that they entered before the final day of the reporting period that we're looking at, because we want to know that they were enrolled at least one day within this time frame. So, and you can see this is tricky. And like,
this is why David's here.
We even have this stuff written down because we wanted to make sure that we got this stuff at the end of the day completely correct. Because we did this yesterday just to make sure that we knew that our reporting filters were what they were supposed to be. And I can tell you, this was not the first draft. We did it one way, we figured out that it was wrong, and then we said, oh yeah, this makes sense. We want to make sure that the entry date is before the final day of the reporting period, because that is what that's what's going to ensure that they were enrolled at least before the end. And there's actually some restrictions that we have to put on the exit date as well, because if they entered 5 years ago and then exited 4 years ago, then they weren't in this reporting period. So that means that the exit date needs to be sometime after the first day of the reporting period.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also weird because the filter groups that we're setting up, or the filters that we're setting up, we're restricting the entry date with the date that's after the restriction for the exit date. So this is really counterintuitive in the way that it appears. But the idea here is that we want to make sure that this person didn't exit before the reporting period even began. So we're trying to eliminate those clients from contention. And something else to consider with the exit date, and this is something that always, I don't want to say always, but 90% of the time will trip me up, is that we want to allow for clients who are still enrolled in the program. So if they entered before the end of the reporting period and are still enrolled, then we want to include those clients. And actually,
you have to decide that. Do you want to just look at exiters? Because right now we would only be looking at those who have exited. So that could be one thing you want to look at. But to David's point, let's add another filter and keep going if there was something else you were going to say, David.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that if any of you guys kind of paid attention to the exit date in the preview that Amanda opened up, there were a ton of clients who were still enrolled in the program who did not have an exit date. So that's something that comes up a lot, and if you preview results, you're going to see that there are, if you forget to add this part of the filter and preview your results, then you're going to see that you're probably missing a lot of clients that you expected to be in your results, because you're only pulling in people who have an exit date.
So to avoid that, we are going to set a second filter that allows for the exit date to be null, meaning it is blank. And once we say save to this, there's one more step, and this refers to our operator. This next step is our operator. So you notice that we have operators all the way through these filters. We want all of these to be ands, because it's the way the results are going to pull in. We want this to be true. We want things that have not been deleted. We also want it to only be from this provider, and we want the clients to meet this condition that they were entered on or before the end of our reporting period. And now we have this, that's true, but it's also saying right now that the client, I would only pull in clients that were exited. And notice this entry, exit, and then exit date. This is really what the filter is set on. That's just the table it's coming from. So now the exit has to be on or after this date, and it has to be null. I hope you're noticing a conflict, because what we need to do is say or. This is the only one that needs to be an or, and we want to make sure our ors are separated from our ands. So I have them in their own reporting groups, because sometimes you could have multiple filters up here, perhaps, if you wanted different parameters around entry dates, and you would have an and there, perhaps, but and more so an and with something else than something about entry dates. But here I need an or. So that's the only filters that I need to set up, because all we had to filter on was the time frame. Everything else that we talked about, the gender, the age of the client, and the provider, which we have set a filter on the provider as well. But the rest of those pieces of information are going to come in because we checked off the fields for them. So the filters only determine which results and what conditions must be true for those clients to pull in. So once I click on counting, we'll see how many results we're going to get. Again, I like this tab because it confirms for me that I have results before I move to the preview tab to look at those results and potentially download them. And for sure, before I would go to the options tab where I would actually save this report. So we do have results. We have less clients than we got in the first report we looked at, where we had, I think, 58 clients. So that's showing us that we did filter out some clients in this case. And preview will now show us the exact fields that we've chose to pull in. That will always remain true from the Fields tab, but the filters is what's determining that we can see only those clients that were active during June 2015 to the end of, well, June 1st, 2016 is what we chose. So that is the way that the time parameters are meant to function. You want to think really critically about whether you want to include those who have exited and those who are currently enrolled. And let's just go back here for fun to filters. And let's get rid of this filter on the exit date if I wanted to just look at how many of them are still enrolled. And I might choose to use the counting field just to see quickly how many there are. And maybe that's a way to cross-check if I know how many clients are enrolled in my program. This is certainly something that would allow you to confirm that number or confirm that your results are true. So now I see that I have a total of 41 clients that are enrolled. And if I come to preview, now I should see only those clients without exit dates. And there you go. And if I want to make this report pretty and give it to someone, and if I don't need to see that there's no exit dates, I would come over to filters and say I don't need that information. I know I'm setting my report to only show those that are currently enrolled. And if I wanted to not see that field, I could get rid of it. So that's the basics of working with this tool, and we definitely want to hear your questions if you have them around especially the filters. If this is something that you've tried to work with already and have something specific that you want to ask us to show, this is a good time to ask that. I am going to also do a second demo, and I think our second demo, actually just going to reference here exactly what we wanted our second demo to be. So in this one we were talking about a specific date range from a specific program. And this time we just wanted to include the program name, the client name, date of birth, social security number, entry date, and exit date. So I'm going to use the same report that I'm looking at here. I'm going to leave that the exit date is null for the moment unless you guys ask questions that can provoke some more ways that we would look at these time-specific filters. But I'll let you think about those. I'm going to come back to tables. Do I actually need to come back to tables? Let's see what filters we've already pulled in. We wanted to look at information that's in the Clients tab too, I want to say. Let's go to Tables, and just to adjust this report right here, we can click on Tables, and just to show you the lovely relationship that exists here, I now have the Clients table appearing. So the request was for the client's name, so I'm going to check off first and last name, and also social security number, I believe. So I'm going to check off all of these just to show you the differences between them. You have the 3 different options for social security number. These are things that it just helps to play with to figure out what's the difference, which one is the one you want. But one thing we've realized is that in our testing is you are only going to be able to get the last 4 digits of the client's social security number using ReportWriter, and that's very intentional. I think I've grabbed everything that we wanted to have in this report. So let's move over to actually to preview. Let's see what's going on in preview now. So you'll see quite a few more things pulled into the results. And here it comes. So what I'm seeing, I now have in the middle here, I have my client's first name, their last name sort of skipped over gender. And then I have the 3 social security number fields at the end. If I wanted to get rid of one of these social security number fields, or 2 of them, I might as well do so. Noticing that I'm only getting the last 4 digits, I don't think that there's any value in including the ones that have all the dashes. So I'm going to choose to go back and get rid of the social security number field and the number dashed field and keep the sorted fields only. And to do that, I'm going to go over to Fields. And I'm going to do this from the Clients table because this is record creation data. So just by unchecking those fields, and if I come back to preview, they are gone. And the last thing that I want to do is perhaps change the ordering of these columns so that they appear in a more logical order. So if I wanted to save this report, I would need to name it. But before I would name it, I would want to choose or change any of these pieces of how the report is set up. And I'm going to choose to put the exit date. Oh, that's right, we took off the exit date. So if I wanted to make the exit date up here, I could, but I don't have it listed in this report because we have it running to show only the currently enrolled clients, very intentionally. But if I wanted to have my name field moved up, I could, and move this to the top here next to client ID, and perhaps with last name also right next to it. And if that's good, I can change the name of anything I wanted to. I could pull in the provider field. If I went back to fields and wanted the program to appear, I could do that. But let's see what that changed for the preview screen. So now I have these together. And let's see what are the questions that we want to look at. So the different Social Security numbers was something that we have some questions about. The last 4 digits, the only thing we were able to see was the last 4 digits. So Diana, your question, and that, can you let us know what you are actually, if there's a clarification to your question, because you're only seeing the last 4 digits of the client Social Security number. Oh, except for the ones where you're seeing more than the last 4 digits. Yeah, so in our testing, we had seen that we were only getting last 4 digits of client Social Security number, but we are looking at fake data. But I thought that when we went to the client's actual record, we saw full socials in this column or in their actual record, and then we were only seeing the last 4 digits. So we'll have to continue looking at why in this particular result here that we are seeing more than just the last 4 digits. And we'll keep looking at that because what we have found was that you could only get a limited amount of the client social. Yeah, that's sort of all I'm going to say on that one because I don't actually have better information yet, but I think we just noticed that perhaps there's a little clarification needed for us as well. I would definitely say to play with that field if you need it, but again, ask the help desk if you run into questions and with real data. When we're looking at fake data, it gets a little bit confusing on what might be going on. And you're welcome. So I think we are at the point for our interactive option. So what I'm going to do is actually close out of this, and I'm not going to save this report, but just keep in mind the filters that we set up here, how we did this, because you are about to be asked to try this yourself. So if you don't have Service Point open, please get Service Point open on another tab of your web browser. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint presentation here to show you the suggestions for this demo. So we're going to give you 4 minutes, and we'll tell you when that 4 minutes starts. So it's not starting yet, but we want you to try to build a quick report just to generate some more conversation. We want you to think about what tables, what filters do you need, and the report that you're going to try to build is one that's a specific program. Only pull in those clients that are currently active. So that's the only request here is that you give a shot at creating a report that has a specific program selected or provider, and that you pull in all the currently active clients in that program.
As far as fields you might want to include, just to give you somewhere to start, you can include whatever fields you want. We're mostly focusing on the filters here. But if you want to include the client ID, the first name, last name, and the entry date and exit date, and then kind of whatever else you guys typically use in your program to look at data.
In 4 minutes.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and start it, and then we'll kind of sit back and let you guys work on this, just because I know when I'm watching a webinar, I sometimes want to actually try some stuff myself. So go ahead and get started.
4 minutes, counting now. Okay, how about now? Can everyone hear us okay now? Okay, good. Thank you, Diana. We appreciate that. One minor volume issue there. I'm glad we caught that. Okay, so I think that you're still hearing us okay. We switched to our computer speakers, but we're with you here. We want to hear some feedback. How did that go? Did anyone have questions in that 4 minutes? And sorry, we were trying to offer some encouragement during that 4 minutes, but you didn't hear us. And one of the questions I asked was if you had thoughts to share, you can send those through in the question function, or if you had things that came up that were challenging, share those as well, because we want to make sure that we walk through anything that would be helpful for us to show based on your little test there of using ReportWriter. Okay, some of you might find that when you are using ReportWriter that you're pulling in very large amounts of data. So something that I do want to caution you about is not setting filters on timeframes. And I offer caution around that because if you do not set filters, if you don't set enough filters, you can end up pulling in an excessive amount of data. And I can't really show an example of that very clearly here because based on where we sit in the system, we can see all of the data. So if I tried that, I would pull in a lot of real data for clients, and I don't want to show you real data. But what I'm suggesting here is that you might want to ensure that you have a filter set up on the provider and on something around dates. And specifically, I'm saying that because keep in mind that there's a history in Chicago where our system was open. Right now, our system is set up so that you can only see your program's data. And that's how it should work also in ReportWriter, that you can only pull in your program's data to your reports. But you have to realize that there was a time before All Chicago managed this database when that was not the case and the system was totally open and everyone could see each other's data. And that history is still in the database. Every year we're getting further and further away from it, but you have the ability to pull in data from before 2012, and that's not the information you're looking for. You're looking for clients that you are currently serving and the information that pertains to them specifically. So be aware that if you don't set filters around the provider and or time, you could get data that does not relate to your program and your clients. So just something I don't want you to see and have you catch you off guard, but that is something that exists. And it looks like someone tried to pull in, there was some confusion about the different tables. And then duplicates, right? So duplicates is something else that you might find that shows up in your results, and that could be something that relates back to the fields that you pulled in or the filters that you set up. Definitely duplicates is something that I've dealt with quite a bit as well. And something too that we're going to show next is around the sub-assessment data. The sub-assessment data you want to be very particular with, because if you keep in mind that right now what you're doing with the HUD verifications in those income sub-assessments, non-cash benefits, health insurance, disabilities, you are creating a record for every possible type of income or source of income, non-cash benefit, health insurance, and disability. So if you don't set up enough filters, you will get a line for an extra row of data for every single possible source of income, meaning that all of the same data will appear in every single row with the only information that would be different coming from the field that pertains to the source of that income or benefit. So that's something that once you see it, it will make more sense, and I think that should be the next example that we show. Yeah, and we'll definitely, it's certainly with time, the different options in the tables is something that is becomes more clear, the different tables to select. No information at all showed up for some people. Okay. If you, again, when you're working in the system, that the intention behind you doing that little test was to really push you to try this right now so that we could have you kind of absorbing the next pieces of what we share with you maybe a little bit differently, because in some of the examples that we'll create, you'll always have access to. So do pay attention to the names of the reports that we set up, and we can email them to you later if you want to reference them. But there are templates. You could look at our templates to help you trace back your steps of which tables you might have chosen, or fields, or the filters. Go ahead.
So one thing I kind of want to compare this to is that it's when you create these reports, especially if you have a really good handle on your data and you know what you expect to see. If you know roughly how many clients are currently enrolled in your program, and you get a number out of ReportWriter that is completely different, I kind of think this is similar to like doing your math homework and then going in the back of the book and checking to see if your answers are correct. Mm-hmm. So you can see whether or not your answers are correct, but you're not sure exactly what happened in between, and you have to look back and see what within the filters maybe went wrong. And a big one. A very often one is, and this is something Amanda pointed out, especially with respect to not getting information at all, is that if you meant to select a filter or use the OR operator instead of the AND operator, if you use the AND operator in an entry-exit situation where you're saying, I want to make sure that these clients either entered after a certain date or their entry-exit date was null, if you accidentally use null, or I'm sorry, if you accidentally use AND, you're telling the computer that you want, or you're telling ReportWriter that you want somebody who has an entry-exit date that is both after a certain date and also null, which is impossible. So a lot of times if you have a reporting filter or two reporting filters that you meant to put an OR between, but you accidentally put an AND between, you're going to get nothing. So if you are showing up with nothing, there are a few ways to troubleshoot. Sometimes what I like to do is look at my filters, and if I can't figure anything out right off the bat, I will just start removing filters. I'll take a picture of all the filters that I have up so I don't lose them, and then I'll just start getting rid of filters, because once I start getting data, I know that I remove the filter one by one. And if I remove a filter and then all of a sudden I get data, I know that there was something going on with that particular filter that was causing all the data to go away. And that's, I mean, this is not, it can be a very rewarding process once you get to the end and you get exactly the data that you were looking for, but it can be very frustrating in that a lot of times you're getting an answer that you know is wrong, but you do not know why it is wrong, which is kind of similar to the experience I expect a lot of people have had in math class. I know I have at times, where you know that there's an issue, but it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what it is.
I'm just showing again what David was just describing. So this is that case where you might have intended to try to say that someone would have enrolled as of a certain time, that they would be enrolled starting like using the end of your reporting period to say, I want everyone that enrolled on or before this date. And then looking at your exit date, right now, what I've said is that what must be true is that everything above, with the provider, the entry date, and that the client must have meet this condition where there's both an exit date on or after this date, which is the beginning of my reporting period, and there must be a blank exit date. So if I come to preview now, I have nothing. Okay, so what David just suggested, if I come back to filters, I could either change this operator to an OR and then come and check out my results. And now I can see that I have results because it's taking a longer time to load. I could use my counting tab to confirm that I have results as well. But here's that data again. If I wanted to come back and say, you know what, I want to see everyone that was exited, I could get rid of the exit date being null, which implies that they're still enrolled, and come back to preview, and now I should only see clients that have exit dates. There we go. So much smaller universe here of client results coming back because I specified this time that they had to be enrolled during the year that I was looking at and exited as well during that time frame. So Any follow-up questions you want to ask right away? Someone was asking about the provider filter, which I'll take this away and just show you again how to create that one. So there's a blank filter group here. I can add the filter and go to entry exits. I would choose the provider field, and then I would want it to equal, and I'm assuming all of you are going to have a drop-down list here, but you would choose the exact provider that you would want to see clients pulled in from who are attached to that particular provider with an entry. If I wanted to have multiple providers, I could click to add a filter again in the same filter group, do entry exits, and then provider again. And this time I would choose a different provider, and I'm going to search for all Chicago to find another fake provider. This time I'll pull in my rapid rehousing project as well and say save. Now this time you need to be clear on what you're doing with this filter, this group in particular, because what I've said right now is that the clients must be enrolled in both of these programs. So there's an and keep in mind that the bottom two conditions must also be true for these clients. There is the possibility to use and operators in the middle of filter groups, but I would say that's a slightly more advanced step. And I don't know that we'll be looking at that option, but we can certainly follow up afterwards. We only scheduled this webinar to go till 11:30, so we're going to try to be mindful of your time and stop by 11:30. But this conversation can continue through the help desk. At this point, I think there was one question that came through that I'll just answer to the group. We are not offering to come out to sites to do just trainings on ReportWriter, but that's just not something we have the capacity to offer at this point. I like to tell people we are a team of 4 supporting over 800 users, so we do our best, and we've recorded this webinar. But if you have specific things that you need our assistance with, we need to know about it still, and we definitely use the help desk to troubleshoot. If we get to the point where we do need to do some more on-site trainings for various reasons, that's something we can always discuss. But in general, it hasn't been something we've had the capacity to offer just at all very consistently. But I'm going to go back to preview here and just see if anything pulled in. And again, I have no matches. So going back to what David was just describing, I should play with my filters at this point to say, oh, hey, what if I choose this to an or? They could be included in either of these programs, but the date parameters must still be true for their entries and exits. Now if I come back to preview, perhaps I'll find some data. Here we go. So at least I have some more results that I could start to figure out whether this is true and whether my report is actually looking like it has valid results here. So I think the sub-assessments was the other thing we wanted to pull in at this point. And I don't know, let's see what our exact one was that we were planning to show. Okay, so some people were looking for reports that they could build that show changes in income over time. One of the things that David and I talked about beforehand was ways to get you that raw data, and then allowing you to figure out how to analyze that data outside of Excel. So we are not able to give you all of the tools that you would need to do the analysis external to Service Point, but we can take you part of the way and show you how to get a massive amount of raw data that you would then be able to filter and deal with separately in Excel, more so with various equations you might choose to use. That would allow you to get at, from those results, the exact things that you need to see. So I'm going to go back to tables, and what I want to look for is to ensure that I have all of the right tables and assessments and sub-assessments pulled in here. So the other table that I need to pull in beyond clients and entry exits and beyond the HUD assessment, I could keep that there and choose to use it or not. Just because I have it available doesn't mean I have to select fields from it, but I do want to pull in monthly income. So that is one example of the sub-assessments. And as I come over here to the fields, I would want to choose from the monthly income what fields I'd want to see, and a start date and end date might be very useful, as well as the source of the income.
and the monthly amount of that income.
Typically, it's better to grab more fields than less, because a lot of times when you're working with the data, and especially as you're building your report, if you've created a filter that is not pulling in the correct stuff, or you're trying to figure out why you're seeing either more results or less results than you expected to, if you have some extra fields in there, maybe ones like the start date and end date of the income, or the exact amount or the source of the income might not be super helpful to you when you're doing your analysis, but they could be very, very helpful for you as you're determining your filters to figure out why the data looks different than what you expected it to look like.
In that line of thinking, I'm going to check off receiving income source. That's that yes/no question that sits inside the sub-assessment for each potential source of income, and that is a very important field, and you can set a filter on it to only pull in the yeses, which is one way to reduce the number of results you'll get. So we'll first show you preview to show you all of the data that's now pulling into this report just by that one change. And then I can go back to filters and choose to put a filter on this monthly income sub-assessment if I don't want to see all of the options. So from preview, let's see what we get now. And check it out. All of the records that we're seeing right here are for Theo Epstein. So that is telling you that you are looking at one client's full records of monthly income from the sub-assessment. So, and this is particularly large because we use this client often for training purposes. But that's the level of detail that you're going to get now by pulling in sub-assessments. And as I keep moving forward, you can see that every single possible source of income was listed there, and I'll go to a different client here. As you can start to see at the very bottom, there's some data from the next client starting to pull in. But this is what you need to be prepared for when you try to work with the sub-assessment data in ReportWriter. And this information is not necessarily garbage. This is certainly not garbage. If this were a real client, this might actually be information that in Excel you could use to get at the parts of it that you require. So if I go to filters, I could choose to say I don't want to see all these no's. Perhaps all I want to see is just these yeses. So this would be the field I'd want to focus on in that line of thinking to set a filter on. Separately, I could consider whether it's just a particular source of income that I want to see, but if I focus on the source of income, I might also want to think about the yeses and the nos, so that if I'm prepared to pull in all the nos, that's fine, but if I want only the yeses for those that have that particular source of income and it's a yes, that would be another way to set up the filter. So from filters, if I want to put yet another filter group, and I'm going to take away this rapid rehousing option just so we actually get some results to look at, and I don't know if we will with that extra condition being there. But again, my filters, I haven't adjusted anything, but notice that monthly income is now set as active up here, and that's good. That's what we want ReportWriter to do for us. It's doing that on our behalf. We don't have to pull in those active fields, and we certainly don't want to remove them unless we want to look at deleted data. So if I add another filter group here, and just to keep my thoughts clear on what exactly I've set up for this report to be doing, I would click on Add the Filter. This time I would have another option here, and I would choose monthly income. And then in what we just discussed, I said I would choose receiving income source, and I want it to equal, and I'm seeing all the options in that field, I want it to equal yes. And if I say save, and now it must be that this client has a yes somewhere for receiving income source, let's see the difference in the results we get under preview. I'm expecting fewer results. There we go. We see fewer results for Theo Epstein, although he is very active and has lots of income that has yeses. But that's, of course, because he's a test client. You would probably see less results here. And then as I scroll over, I should only be seeing those clients and those records more so that have yeses in this column. If I wanted to further that filter and make it even more specific, I could come back up now and say that's not specific enough, and I could add another filter, and I could choose to put it again on monthly income, and this time I could put it on the source if I wanted to only see an earned income, or I could change it to the HUD, COC, and ESG entry assessment, and I could look for the other field related to income that's below the sub-assessment, which is total monthly income. And so that field, I want to say, is referred to, there it is, total monthly income. If I want to perhaps set a field on that, or a filter on that, and I could have done this on in the sub-assessment one too. I could have decided to do this on the monthly income one with the amount, but I could have it be is greater than 0 if I only wanted to see those clients that have an income amount more than 0. And come over to preview and let's see what we find. This would also be a way, if you think of that in reverse, you could find the clients that are missing that field. You could find the ones that have yeses and then a 0 for total monthly income, which would be a data quality issue. So my results have changed up here a little bit. And as I go over all the way here, I didn't pull in total monthly income. So if I wanted to pull that field to confirm that my results are true, I would just look for total monthly income and pull that in if I wanted it to start showing up. But if I am comfortable enough with this tool, I might feel as if the change in the results was confirmation enough that I had met the end goal here. But that's some of the work that really happens in ReportWriter in my mind, is exactly what we've been showing you, is that you use the report, you can create a template to start from, and then just keep working with it and keep tweaking the results to ensure that you are getting what you're looking for. And there was a request around goals and services as well. So I will, and just to kind of further show you here that rest of those results, so no 0s anymore. But if I come back to tables, I again wanted to point out what we didn't get a chance to cover here. Service codes, service groups, and services. In the service codes table, I'm going to pull that over just to show anyone that's looking for this. The code here is not going to give you the name of the actual service transaction type that you choose. It's actually, if I scroll down, you want to click on description. Description in this one is what's really going to show you the case care management, building inspections, rental deposits. That's where that data lives. It's called description in here. I just wanted to point that out for you. And the other thing that we were asked about was goals. And for goals, you do have the goals table. But I also will follow up with the person that asked for that, because there's an ART report that you can also use to pull in goals data. And just to go over quickly here, there's the data for the goals that you're able to pull in. But that's all the time that we have, so I'm going to stop at that point. Remember, this options tab is very important, just as a final note on how to keep your results and your templates if you want to come back to them, or delete them and get good at practicing by just creating your reports over and over again if you choose. I will go to our last slide here just so you have our contact information, and we definitely do appreciate all of you joining us. Remember to contact the help desk as your questions arise. The fastest way to get in touch with any of us is to email hmis@allchicago.org, but if you choose to come to one of us directly, you have mine and David's email addresses here as well, and of course the URL for the help desk, hmis.thechicagoalliance.org. I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar, and we thank you for your time.